So I'm going to get on the other side of that little screen that your friend has that provides them some privacy, and be the house next door and say, you know what, those things are so tall, I can't see the mountain from here. It's kind of interfering with my view.
Yeah, and
Which case do you want to take?
well, I'll tell you what. I think you're going to have problems with the tree blocking your view. I think you're going to have problems with that case off the top of your head. At least if it's been there a long time, it's foreseeable it's going to grow up. But I know that in other areas, and particularly, I believe Larry Ellison, the billionaire, has a house out in California somewhere where the neighbors are fighting with him because of his trees. And he's planted, because he can afford to, these very tall trees that apparently now do block their view. Um, so I don't know. I don't know. You can win those cases.
Karl Rominger, Eric Vorodi here. We're talking about trees. Typically, when things get to be to legal, crossing of swords, folks are looking for damages. So
Right.
I've trimmed off the side of, the tree that was hanging over my fence because I was afraid the limbs were going to break the fence, or whatever the thing happens to be. Folks are ticked off and they want compensation somehow. How do you assess that?
Well, I handle these kinds of cases the same way I do a construction case. You come in my office and you can tell me all the things that were done wrong and all the problems and how much compensation you deserve, and I'll look at you and say, now hire an expert before you hire the lawyer, and go find a contractor or an engineer or a arborist or somebody to come in and say, these are your damages. Because when you get to court, you have to prove your damages. If you're the party complaining, the burden of proof, the burden of persuasion is initially on you. And so a lot of times when people are sure that they were damaged, about a third of the time, the expert will go out and say, no, what this other person did is completely acceptable and completely normal, or wasn't foreseeable, or was an act of God, or whatever. But once that expert testimony is what it is, you're going to lose anyhow. I see a lot of, when we talked about, you referenced young lawyers earlier. One thing that young lawyers often do is run into a case not really thinking through what they need to prove. So they file a lawsuit first. And after they file a lawsuit and they get the expert's opinion, they go, oh, I got a problem. I have to find another expert. Well, it's not that simple, because usually experts are pretty above board, and you might find one with a slightly different opinion. But if you're 80% in the wrong, it's going to be hard to get somebody to change their opinion. And so the suit's basically a dead issue. So that's the first thing I do, is say, before you give me a couple $1,000s to start a lawsuit, go give this other. And they don't want to do it sometimes. People, because they don't need an expert to tell them they were damaged. They're sure of it.
Reminds me of a story early on when I was doing tree appraisals. A lawyer called me to look at a tree that a landscaper had limbed up, simply limbed up, because they didn't want to smack themselves in the face as they were riding the mower around. The homeowner, apparently this happened unbeknownst to the homeowner when they discovered it, they were looking to sue the landscaper because they had damaged this tree that they had an emotional attachment to. When I got to look at the tree, I discovered, if I hadn't known that it was limbed up, I just would have thought that it was being nicely maintained.
Right.
But the real problem that nobody had noticed was this tree was weak on its roots and susceptible to falling on the house. When I called the lawyer about it, he said, all right, keep your notes to yourself. And that was the last I heard from him.
Right. And that's the thing. When we hire an expert witness, we don't have to use your report. And so sometimes you'll talk to an expert and maybe take a different tact. But then again, maybe sometimes we just don't want to report. We're still going to snooker the other side a little bit with some bolster and see what happens. But if push comes to shove, you're not going to win when you carry the burden. And while lay people, and I hate to say lay people because my brother always said to me, if you call me a lay person again, I'm going to slug you.
He's not here.
He's not here, right?
He's on his way.
But I hate to use the term, but the idea is lay people can testify to value of things that they own. But when it comes to specialized damages, like replacing a tree or things like that, they probably aren't able to do that. And worse, they can't go into what we call causation. And that's what the experts therefore tell us: who caused the problem and how, so we can define whether they violated their duty or not.
And Carl just used an interesting term too. He said the homeowner or the property owner might know or be able to come up with the value of what it would cost to, quote unquote, replace that tree. But oftentimes it's not the value of the replacement, and that's where they go off kilter. Is they'll let's say a tree is damaged beyond repair and it's going to be removed. Well, they'll go to a nurseryman and say, what would it cost to replace that tree? It was a 10-inch caliper dogwood, and I know it takes a long time to grow them that big. And he might say $20,000. Well, when you go to an arborist who's been trained in tree appraisal, he will have to take into consideration the species of the tree and how appropriate it is for your location, the location of the tree within your property, the value of your property relative to other properties, and the condition of the tree. Maybe the tree was in such poor condition that it was a hazard to begin with, and not only is it not worth $20,000, maybe it's worth zero. Or maybe it was, once you put all those depreciation factors in, you start with the $20,000 price of replacing the tree, and you depreciate it down to what could be $1,000 or $2,000. So now you have a $20,000 appraisal from the nurseryman or the landscaper, and a $2,000 appraisal from the arborist.
And this is exactly what happened to me with this case where the guy called because the tree was limbed up, supposedly damaged. The tree actually had negative value.
Well, and that's, we see this even out in family law cases with divorces. We bought a new bedroom suite, and it was $3,500. So that's the value. And you're like, now come on, you're not going to buy a used bedroom off somebody else for the full retail value. In fact, you're going to pay $500 if it's in good shape.
Right.
And that's the thing where people's mind goes to, what did it cost me to get it, or what it's going to cost to actually redo it, not the true value.